Welcome to Establish the Edge. I'm your host, Mike Leone, back with part 5 of the Establish the Edge off-seasons projection special with Ben Gretch. Special shout out to Gretch and also to Mark Dankenbring and Jack Miller over at Establish the Run. It's definitely a grind getting through these projections. I've got a lot of help. Ben is mostly doing these himself, so kudos to him. You can follow Ben at Yards Per Gretch on Twitter. Also, his Stealing Signals newsletter over at bengretch.substack.com. Today, we are going to dive into the AFC South. Ben, thanks for joining me for part 5.
Yeah, man. AFC South, the division of the rookie quarterbacks, right? Like if Will Levis takes over for Tannehill, Trevor Lawrence is going to be the elder statesman. So this is a fun one to project these teams because we don't really know what these quarterbacks are going to be like in year one, what their offenses might be like. Often, pretty conservative, so it might not be the most fantasy-friendly division in the league.
Yeah, we'll start with Jacksonville, which is the most fantasy-friendly team by probably a pretty decent bit here in the division. And we saw, underdog Peterson, Trevor Lawrence find his footing last year after they had, the disastrous year with Urban Meyer. They got up to being, a little bit more up-tempo, throwing a bit more. Ben and I each have them a little bit above league average in terms of plays per game, a little bit above league average in terms of called pass rate. I think they'd be even more aggressive if their division didn't stink so much, but it might create, some divisional matchups that give them pretty favorable game scripts. All said and done, Ben has them slightly pass heavier, netting out at one pass attempt more per game than us. He's got 36.5 pass attempts per game. We're at 35.4. Any thoughts on the play calling side of things?
Yeah, just another one. Shout out to Pat Thorman with his great pay stuff at ETR. But he noted that prior to their Week 11 bye, the Jags were 14th in situation neutral pace and 18th in pass rate. And then they jumped to 6th and 7th in pace and pass rate after that bye coming down the stretch. And so I'm kind of carrying over some of that into this year. Obviously, they played pretty well down the stretch. But it's not a guarantee. I mean, one of the things that was tough for me in the projection was just knowing that they're playing in a division with Houston and Indianapolis and Tennessee. That's going to be 6 pretty slow games probably.
Yeah, which is a little bit of a bummer. I do think that if some of those teams surprise, like there is a ceiling case for, the pace and the pass rate for Jacksonville, where in the right situation, maybe they're running 65 plays per game and they're calling passes at a pretty aggressive rate, which, is kind of exciting. We already have them for a decent bit of attempts. You've got Lawrence for 620. We've got him for 590. So we're at like 4,500-ish passing yards. So this offense, projects pretty well for fantasy. I know we have a weird dynamic that's somewhat gotten, in line with the market, but initially we were really low on Lawrence relative to the market, but really high on his pass catchers, just because could kind of see a lot of concentrated pass volume, weren't projecting, probably had room to project more of a leap than we are for Lawrence in terms of efficiency. I know you've got him at 30 touchdowns. We've got him at 26. So that's something that maybe needs to come up a little bit on our end. I do think where Lawrence is going now is probably makes sense. He's quarterback 8 on underdog. I think that's right. He's going at around 70th overall, which is like a touch rich to me, but like that's sort of what the market is on quarterbacks. And I think within the market, that's about an appropriate tag on Lawrence.
Yeah, and looking at those touchdowns, I mean, shout out Jack Miller, he mentioned at the top, did some work pulling together look ahead lines. Jacksonville's expected to score the 10th most points in the league by that. Obviously, the top like 5 teams. And then Jacksonville's in that next group, basically, of teams that the market likes to be certainly much better than the market liked coming into last year. It likes them to be potentially the breakout offense if they weren't already in 2022, however you want to kind of frame that. But and you mentioned as well the Urban Meyer year 2 years ago, Doug Peterson last year. I think that's a really good thing, a good note as well, where last year when we were having this discussion is like, how bad was Urban Meyer for this team? Is there just some potential that it can't get worse, right? Like it can only get better. And we say that sometimes and then it stays bad. And then, when it stays bad, people are like, oh yeah, obviously it can be really bad. Well, this is a great example of where, that regression hit, right, in a positive way. And Trevor Lawrence doesn't completely suck just because his rookie year was bad. Pretty good lesson for, how regression works sometimes. But going into this year now, year 3 of his career and year 2 with Doug Peterson, there's reason for optimism, right?
Yeah, I definitely think there's reason for optimism. I mean, especially if you just look at the way last year played out. It just seemed like they kind of got it towards the end, and they're going to ride Lawrence. And really, the only bummer is the division maybe not pushing them. It should hopefully it offsets in terms of like just they are really efficient offensively in those games, and sometimes that can be underweighted where their scoring potential is going to be quite strong in some of those games, but they're surprisingly in terms of average spread like the 7th best in terms of average spread if you just average across all their games, which is so I guess it's a mixed bag. Like there's good things and bad things about the division. But yeah, moving over to running back with ETN, he's someone I've struggled with where the pass catching wasn't where we kind of expected it to be year 1. And there's some grumblings that they don't want him to have as much of a workload as he had last year, but he's also a player on an offense that we're optimistic about. And those favorable game script division games are good for him. He can be very efficient. So there's some skill things for ETN we still really like. It's just like, is he going to catch enough passes? Is he going to get enough total workload?
Yeah, it's weird how limited he was as a receiver, given that his profile was good in college and he was very efficient last year as a receiver. He had an 80% catch rate. He had 7 yards per target. It's just kind of odd that they weren't using him more when they didn't have a lot else. Obviously, they cut James Robinson in season. And then Etienne was also efficient as a runner as well. And so, looked good, like you said, from a talent perspective. But Doug Peterson does have the history of sort of committee with the running backs. That was kind of the big thing when he was with the Eagles. Not surprising that there's discussion at this point about potentially sort of reducing his role. One thing I found interesting, just sort of circling back to Lawrence on his rushing side, like his rushing gets cited a lot, but he had pretty low scramble and also low design run rates. Like it doesn't look to me like he's going to run a ton. So, there's a lot of rush work here. It's like,
yeah,
ETN very efficient last year, looks good. How much is Tank Bigsby, a rookie, going to come in and take? Jermichael Hasty, Dearness Johnson, who these other guys that are going to be, on the roster, are they really going to cut into ETN a ton? I think it's one of those things where it's like Pearson would like them to be using less ETN, but this is a team that we just talked about has high hopes for this year, expects to take the next step, expects to win the division. He's, I think, probably pretty clearly their most talented back.
Yeah, and I think when all is said and done, ETN's a pretty good bet right now. Can get him in the beginning of the 4th round. Like that's the type of running back that we're going to target, someone that has legitimate skill upside. And we do think the offense has upside as a whole. You and I've got him around 220 carries, right around 50 targets. So I think even if you take a somewhat conservative approach on the workload, he's still kind of fine there, which is why I feel comfortable. Last year he was going earlier in an offense that had more concerns, right? So I do think some of that is just the market has shifted to wide receivers more than running backs, but I do think right now is kind of a good risk reward opportunity on ETN. And it's not like we both have the rookie that they drafted, Tank Bigsby, for work. We've got him for around 100 carries. I think he's a fine late round pick. But behind him, Dearness Johnson's probably running back 3, who I stashed on a bunch of teams last year early in the offseason and went very poorly for me in that regard, Gretch.
Yeah, he looked like a talent-based stash, right? But he didn't really do much. I don't think the backups are really a major concern for ETN. On the pass catchers, the big note here was that and we've mentioned it on a couple other shows, sort of comparing potential teams that could be like Jacksonville in terms of the concentration of like routes and targets last year. Christian Kirk ran 620 routes, which is a lot. Zay Jones ran 572, also a ton. Evan Ingram 523. That's a really good number for a tight end. I mean, anywhere up like around 600 or above 600 routes is a lot for anyone, and then for a tight end to be up over 500, very good. Marvin Jones was at 474. He was pushing 500 routes for a wide receiver 3. That's also very strong, right? Because early in the season he was playing more in 2 wide receiver sets. Zay Jones sort of took over the 2 wide receiver sets mid-season. But those are all high numbers for your top 4 pass catchers. All 4 of those guys had at least 80 targets. And then other than setting the running backs aside, beyond those 4, you had Jamal Agnew at 30 targets. No one else higher than 13, which was their tight end 2. They only had 5 wide receivers targeted. It was one of those types of offenses where, it requires some health to get there. But my main thought on that is that for a guy like Zay Jones, for example, had a pretty solid year in terms of overall numbers, had his best yards per out run, but still was only at 1.44 there. Best targets per out run, earned a little bit more volume, but in large part was successful because of the routes bump. Sets a career high in routes and not particularly efficient necessarily. And now with Calvin Ridley coming in, like he's a great example of a guy where he kind of moves down the pecking order a little. The concentration of routes is exciting, but I don't know that I want to bet back into it now that it's priced in a little bit. Like Zay is now a pretty expensive 4th receiving weapon for a team, right? Like it is kind of priced in on this offense, I feel like, for somebody like him. But yeah, positive note overall.
Yeah. What's interesting though is we both have Zay for almost the exact same stat line, around 90 catches, just shy of 700 yards, over 4 touchdowns. And honestly, I kind of he's going as wide receiver 55. So I kind of think the market's, I hear what you're saying, but I almost think the market's overcorrected for the Ridley addition. And if they're still going to be super concentrated, he's got some contingent value on either Kirk or Ridley going down. And if they're going to put up points in those divisional games, and then we think they're going to have an above average pass attempts per game overall, even considering those scripts, that wide receiver 3 hopefully gets there, and they concentrated, even if he's the 4th targeted. Some of this will come down to, we talked about the ETN stuff, but they just didn't throw to the running back in base, like at all, which is crazy, which just adds to the concentrated passing game, if 4 guys sounds like a lot, but if it's just those 4 guys, for like 80% of the targets, 85% of the targets, like that's actually still pretty good. So I'm like weirdly, like it feels gross and it felt gross last year. I'm weirdly kind of still in on Zay. I know we've got him wide receiver 49. He's going wide receiver 55 on Underdog. And some of it comes down to, Ben, where it's like, we talked about this with Juju a little bit, like ideally maybe and best ball, you've kind of drafted your wide receivers already at this point, right? So you don't have to take Zay Jones. But if you do need wide receiver in this area of the draft, I kind of reluctantly end up with Zay a decent bit. But circling back to the top, one of the hardest guys to know what to do with is Calvin Ridley for a few reasons. One, for just macro strategy in drafts, you get a point in the 3rd round where he's getting pushed up with all the wide receivers getting pushed up. And there's a lot of these wide receivers towards the end of the 3rd round where it's a little bit uncomfortable. These are guys we probably wouldn't have been drafting in the 3rd round before. And you mix that with Ridley's stuff specifically, which is like, on a positive standpoint, I could see this guy going at the 1-2 turn next year if he's as good as he was in Atlanta. And now he's playing with prime Trevor Lawrence in an offense that's, we've talked about like up tempo and probably going to be slightly positive PROE. At the same time, the dude has barely played football in 2 years. And it's hard for me to stomach that such, an early draft pick, even though the upside's there there's just a lot of unknown. The uncertainty can be good, but it can be bad too.
For sure. I'm not pulling the trigger on Ridley a lot in my own drafts. At the same time, back in like February over at my Stealing Signals newsletter, I wrote up a team by team sort of targets per out run breakdown of last year. And my note there, based on all this route concentration and Zay Jones, Christian Kirk, Ingram, all having solid but not spectacular sort of targets per out run numbers, was that there was room for Ridley to be a true number one if he's up for it. Like,
Mhm.
there's not really anyone in this passing game that's going to stop him from consolidating targets as like a legit alpha if he's that guy still. But he's been away from the game for a really long time. If you haven't read that Players Tribune article he wrote, just an awesome off the field note. He's a guy that you want to root for. Anyway, yeah, I mean, he's a tough one to read when you're away from the game for so long, but did seem, I mean, I weigh some of that stuff in. It did seem to have his head in the right place. He's writing about this stuff. He seems really excited to get back out here and prove that he still has, some left in the tank, and all of his best days aren't completely behind him. So, I just wish we we're getting a little bit of a discount on the fact that he hasn't played a whole lot in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I have some Ridley, the way it works out. He is a guy that, like, from a pure projection standpoint and based on how the positions are being drafted, is kind of justified where he's going in the third round. I've just kind of like, at ETR, I know in general, we've just sort of toned it down because we're like, what are we doing here a little bit? Like we're drafting Calvin Ridley 31st overall. It's tough.
He's going like back to back with like Breece Hall and Ramondre Stevenson, who are running backs that arguably should be going in the second. And
that's where
it's not really that he doesn't belong in the third, but it's a hard click compared to those kinds of players.
Yeah, I kind of lean towards the running backs there. The other thing is, I think Christian Kirk gets shorted a little bit where he had this good but not amazing year, and then in people's minds, it's like, oh, well, we saw what Christian Kirk could do. It was fine, but it was nothing special. And like my take's kind of like, what if he just does the same thing and like runs a little bit hotter on efficiency and the offense is a little bit better from the get-go. And then all of a sudden that kind of boring, good, but not great season becomes great. And down the stretch, like those last 3 games, they had the must win in week 18. And then the 2 playoff games, they had a 25% target share, 30% target share, and then a 36% target share. So I think, honestly, overall, I think it's a little bit of a coin flip between these two, with Ridley having more upside and more downside and Kirk being a little bit safer. But certainly at cost, I'm in on Christian Kirk over Ridley. Kirk's ADP is 49. So you're talking the 4-5 turn, which, 16 picks after Ridley. Those are 16 pretty important picks as well. So I'm pretty bullish on Kirk this year. He's one of my highest owned wide receivers early on.
And then Ingram obviously factors in as well. And what we saw last year with the concentration of routes, but no one really consolidating volume, was some random spike weeks, which is a positive, obviously, in best ball. We saw, huge games from Ingram down the stretch, some big ones from Zay as well. His price is more palatable. You get the tight end benefit as well. My concern with all of them is when you get to this level of like route concentration, if no one really separates, which Ridley's probably the best bet, as you just noted, no one really separates, is like, is there real upside as opposed to just like big miss, big hit versus small hit at various costs? We kind of talk about that on these pods sometimes. And a guy like Zay, for example, right, we were talking about like you're probably not wanting to target wide receivers. It's kind of like right outside the wide receiver window. You're getting right after some of the the cheaper, exciting rookies, like maybe a Quentin Johnston, who I think has very much has big hit potential. And like a round or 2 later, you're looking at Zay Jones. And again, it's like in that pocket of the draft, it's really hard for me to click on the player where I'm like, yeah, I mean, the routes are going to be really concentrated. But I don't really feel like Zay Jones has ever shown us any reason to believe he can get much higher than the 20% targets per run he had last year and be like a legit upside profile. So it's tough, but they're priced up, fairly. It's just they're more probably small miss, small hit players. At least not really, but at least Kirk, Ingram, and Zay.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more bullish overall. But there is also, with Zay in particular, we hit on this a lot, but there's a fundamental difference in what you're drafting between best ball and what you're drafting in managed leagues, which is, we can find Zay light on waivers in a managed league without too much difficulty. Like, it can happen in your average league. So like we'll take someone with less projectable volume can maybe, maybe the lower, they're dogs to outscore Zay Jones, but in the scenarios that they do, it's a lot more impactful for your team. Whereas in best ball, like having those points from the get-go and being on the field without having waivers is a bit more important. And the market's just growing wider. I think Zay's like going almost 40 picks behind QJ now. I know they were pretty close there for a while. But yeah, but with Ingram, you've got him at 108 targets. We have 93. And yeah, he's a tough one too, because for all the reasons you said, Gretch, you generally like get a little worried about taking these tight ends like Ingram, where they go, where it feels like they have a lot of upside and not a ton of downside, but like historically that hasn't really been the case here. But we also saw what happened in the playoffs. I know, we do a bunch of the FFPC playoff challenge teams, and it was like fading him was a horrible. I mean, we weren't even really fading him, but we had some specific teams we were rooting for that he wasn't on, and it was like with the tight end premium scores, like, God damn it, will you stop throwing the ball to Evan? So definitely some bias for the playoffs there. Let's go to Tennessee, and we're both bearish on their plays and their called pass rate. Like, we're incredibly close here. We both have them just under 62 offensive plays per game. We each have them at exactly a 55% called pass rate. And it's a tough one, in terms of Tannehill versus Will Levis. I know people have taken Tannehill as like a backdoor stack guy. Personally, I have not drafted like any Tannehill except maybe like very, very early in the offseason. I just worried the team is bad and Levis gets a chance to start here. So, talking with Corain too, it just seems like some of the worst quarterback bets you can make in best ball are these late round guys that don't have a ton of upside, who might not have a job at like the most important time. So do you feel any differently here? In fact, I would say like even on DraftKings with 20 rounds, so once in a while, if I get in trouble at QB, I'll even take a gamble on Levis late, instead of Tannehill.
I don't have any strong differentiating feelings there. I want to take some Tannehill. We're only a year removed from him leading the Titans to the number 1 seed. But I think, in terms of how you play best ball, that point that you just brought up that Crane has made is smart. Like, it's just sort of an unnecessary risk to take on games played risk, especially late season games played risk. And it does feel like Levis is probably going to play some late. I mean, I think Tannehill probably plays the majority of the season. I'm projecting him to play 3/4 of the season. I've got, a note here that it's very like Atlanta Falcons 2022 vibe, where we all kind of expected Marcus Mariota to play a decent chunk of the season and probably be fairly usable, but also felt pretty confident that Ritter would play late. And that's exactly the way that it played out, more or less the way that the community had drawn it up. And it feels like the community is going to be similarly right. It's thinking similarly and going to be similarly right here. That, you can win in fantasy on betting against consensus in certain spots, but that's, in best ball, late round quarterback, like you said, that doesn't even really have a ton of upside in Tannehill. Not really a risk that's worth the payoff isn't really worth, taking that risk. So yeah, I'm with you there. My note on the play volume, I mean, this is one of my lower play volume totals, was just that, hey, they're talent deficient in the passing game, especially. Kind of expecting Vrabel to try to win ugly. I do think Vrabel is a good coach and will keep these guys somewhat competitive, which is part of the reason I think Tannehill probably starts a decent chunk of the year.
There's some like Arthur Smith vibes, obviously Arthur Smith coming from Tennessee, where it's like, this guy's not playing the game in the optimal way, but like within what he's doing it well, sort of.
Right.
And that leads us to Derrick Henry, who, I've been mostly out on the past few years, kind of just depending on cost. But now here we are with 3rd round Derrick Henry, and it's tough. I've taken Henry at the big, at that 2-3 turn sometimes. Especially, you've got Chris Olave, T. Higgins, Devonta Smith with ADPs ahead of him. And I probably prefer those wide receivers, or I at least think it's close. But then, to me, at least, I think there's a drop off after Devonta and T at wide receiver. And that's where, I'm taking like Henry and Josh Jacobs there at that 2-3 turn. The issue with Henry, of course, is just kind of what it is every year, right? Like, he's really volume dependent on a team that's not that great. And, he's getting older. We've seen the efficiency start to drop off. So that volume dependence has even become higher than when he was breaking off ridiculous touchdown runs. But hey, he freaking plays the Houston Texans twice in the fantasy playoffs and is sure to absolutely dominate those games. If he's still standing week 15, he's going to go ham in the playoffs. So this is definitely a tough one, but I almost feel like the way the market's doing makes the decision easier for me, where I'm taking those 3 wide receivers ahead of Henry, and if they're gone, I'm fine taking Henry.
Yeah, I think that's all well put. He's definitely one where the projection to me isn't really significant. He's going to take as many carries as he can handle. He led the league in rush attempts again last year, 3rd time in 4 seasons. The only time he didn't is when he got hurt in 2021. He's also going to turn 30 on January 4th. So it's his age 29 season, because we do age seasons in football based on December 31st. But it's worth noting that, his birthday being January 4th, he actually turns 30 between his week 17 and week 18 games. It's still part of, this regular season where he's turning 30.
30. Yeah.
He's definitely up there. And it's like, I definitely think Derrick Henry is a very unique running back, right? Like, however you want to put that, generational, whatever, something that's different than other running backs and should be analyzed as such. But it's tough. Like, at what point? I mean, he's not going to do it forever, right? At what point do you not want to make that bet anymore? He's definitely getting up there. So it's tricky, tough offense, a tough situation. I've wound up with my projection here coming in really hot on their touchdowns, largely because of Derrick Henry's always really strong rush TD rate and then massive rushing volume. And so I had a ton of rush TDs for him, and I had to nuke their TDs. I mean, I had to nuke his, but also like Traylon Burks, very small sample, but decent TD rate. Okonkwo, decent little TD rate so far in his career. Tannehill has always had like a really good rush TD rate as a quarterback. And so I went back through and I had to like nuke a lot of my TD rates to get their projected TDs back down to closer to what the market is saying their projected points is going to look like. And that didn't lead to me probably projecting Henry for fewer rush TDs. I got him at 10.3, but I probably projected him for 12 most seasons, over the last 5 years, probably fewer this year than I have over the last 5 years or so. It is, I mean, and that's what the offense, that's what we're hearing from the market. Like, that's what the offense is going to be. So that adds, a layer of risk. Looks like you guys are even lower than me on the rush TDs at 8.4. So
yeah, I'm trying to see if we have a manual doc there or if it's just based on their team total. I think we might. We have a slight manual doc, but it's one of those things where like his baseline touchdown rate we have like kind of based on his talent in the last couple seasons we have at 3.2%, but the kind of algo that takes into account their team total this year and whatnot's at 2.2%. So we're splitting the difference a little bit and going at 2.6% for his touchdown rate. Our touchdown rates are a little bit more conservative, I think, in general. But you'll sort of see that align with the props market somewhat. Behind him, Ben, I was drafting Tyjae Spears early. Interested in your thoughts on him. You're generally more in touch with the rookies. I started to back off just because, I was talking to Connor O'Driscoll, who writes some stuff for RotoViz, won the FFPC best ball contest a couple years ago. And he was just pointing out that some of these, and Jack Miller has done some work here too, some of the pure handcuff backs tend to be overrated as end of the round picks. I know we've done this with Tennessee where we're like, Henry's going to go down, like who's going to step up? And, he did get hurt the 1 year, but I don't even think we had the right guy because who was it that we just took to like who was that running back?
Hassan Haskins last year, maybe?
No, who's the guy before Haskins?
Darrington Evans.
Yeah. Darrington Evans was the dude. But the one thing with note on Spears and Haskins, the other back this year, I think Haskins just got in legal trouble, which they don't really have much depth. So it might more clearly be Spears if something happened to Henry. I'm not sure what will materialize out of that. I just know that.
But he is only like a 200-pound back. I mean, he's one that has been tough for me. I know a lot of the prospect guys really like him. There's some stuff with his knees too. I think people have like talked about how he doesn't have an ACL in one of his knees or something. Like I don't know the exact background on that.
There's some.
So he's a tricky one. I'm kind of expecting him to take over the Dontrell Hilliard role and kind of be a little bit more on passing downs, sort of getting his carries against lighter boxes and like more pass obvious situations. So I am projecting him to be pretty efficient on the ground relative to like, Henry's going to have to run against loaded boxes a lot. So I did find myself kind of liking Spears having a little bit of a standalone role with maybe some efficient running and a few targets here and there. But I actually don't really see him as a huge upside swing in the handcuff mold. I think they would probably use a bigger back, whether that's Haskins, whether that's like Julius Chestnut, who they were using last year, or if they bring someone else in somehow. That's one of the things that you can find in the open market, is bigger backs right now that, like older backs that could take those carries. So I don't really see Spears as a huge like upside handcuff play. And then, like I was saying, I got a little more optimistic on the standalone value, but I wasn't very optimistic in general because it's not a great offense. And we haven't actually seen a ton of, receiving production for these like secondary backs behind Henry. Like Henry's on the field a ton, right? So I don't know. I haven't been taking a ton of Spears. I've taken some of him just in the off chance I'm wrong, but I don't like the combination of a lack of like workhorse size and some of the medical red flags, and then the situation where the offense isn't expected to be very good. And if Henry goes down, it could really crater. And even if Spears is getting a lot of the work, it might not be that valuable work. So not really one that a rookie that I'm jumping all over.
Cool. Yeah, those are good notes. Let's go over to wide receiver. And I'll say right off the bat, I know we're a little short volume, especially Kyle Phillips, who you've got a lot more targets than us. We've got like 25% unallocated volume on Tennessee because the roster is just so bad that we're afraid to pepper these guys with volume. With that said, we probably should bring that number down a bit as we get closer to the season. So we're typically just more conservative than Ben on the targets here. And that starts with Treylon Burks. You've got 126 targets. We've got 105 targets. And mixed bag rookie season. I'd say more bad than good, but not like we're shutting the door on this guy type season. We're more in line with market. I'm assuming you're pretty bullish where he's going in and grabbing some Burks, given the projection here. So how are you evaluating a rookie season that's tough to evaluate between just the health and how this offense operates?
Yeah, I think the whole offense, so I am a little hot on the targets, but you have to extrapolate some of the targets. Or this is, sort of my note. I think the way that you're doing it is another way. It certainly makes sense, is like kind of having some unallocated targets. But that if you're going to allocate all the targets, you got to extrapolate someone's target shares up, because their top two target earners last year were Robert Woods and Austin Hooper, and they're both gone. And they didn't really add much, right? Like they have Burks moving into a year two role. They have Okonkwo moving into a year two role. Kyle Phillips. Still have Nick Westbrook-Akine, who is sort of a rotational player. The biggest add really was Chris Moore. Like there's not a lot here in terms of who would step in and take a bunch of targets in this passing game. Burks did show some stuff on a per route run basis. He's a pretty good example of the types of players that I think make sense to analyze that way, because he wasn't running full route share early and then had some injury issues, so didn't always play, big route shares or full snap shares. But he was up over 20% targets per route run, 1.75 yards per route run. Those are good, solid, rookie season numbers in a tough passing game. And in particular, he drew targets and won in situations where, for a stretch, like when he was banged up, the Titans didn't have any kind of passing game situation. And then Burks was back, and it was like, this is the only guy they can target in one-on-one spots. They're looking for him to win as a legit number one. And he was hit some games where his targets per route run up over 30% of his routes, low route volume, but it was we're putting him out there to throw to him and he's winning. So some stuff that I thought was promising. Phillips, you mentioned, he only ran 48 routes, but he had a 27% targets per route run, which is a really high number. Again, 48 routes is a very small sample. Okonkwo ran 172 routes. He had a 26% targets per route run. So these guys were all pretty good at earning volume on limited route shares. I wouldn't expect any of them to necessarily be able to translate that type of volume earning to larger route shares, because that's not the way this math usually works with these targets per route run numbers. But they at least showed an ability, I think, to win in a way that now that I look at the rest of this depth chart, and like Westbrook Akine, for example, ran over 400 routes and only earned a target on 11% of his routes. That doesn't look like a guy who's going to suddenly earn a ton of volume. Chris Moore, probably not a guy that's going to earn a ton of volume. So for me, my note was like, yeah, I think it's okay to push Burks and Chig a little bit to a lesser extent, but push them both their target shares in year 2 as kind of year 2 bets. And then Kyle Phillips, I mean, maybe has a shot to be that number 3 guy, but based on a really small sample.
Yeah, I think Phillips, especially in like managed leagues, I would be keen to pick him up early based on if he can replicate some high targets per out run stuff out of the gate, might be a quick guy to pick up for cheap to get on your bench. I suppose now is maybe a good time to talk DeAndre Hopkins. Is one of the teams that potentially could sign DeAndre Hopkins. It feels like a weird fit for Hopkins, but at the end of the day, I think probably going where the money is, no matter what you say, as far as wanting to win and whatnot, or maybe guys could be talked into this being a winning situation. So part of the reason for the unallocated target share is like the threat of DeAndre Hopkins. As for Hopkins himself, just because we don't, we're doing divisional pods, so we don't talk to free agents. And this year there's like a few free agents. Do you have any Hopkins thoughts as of right now, without knowing where he's going, as far as, he's one of those guys that he's going 43rd overall on underdog. So basically, like, are you in and out on Hopkins as a 4th round pick?
I mean, Hopkins' numbers looked good, and we know that the really good receivers can continue to perform at least into the early 30s, and he's not, way past an age where he should be clearly a fade, in my opinion. So from a talent perspective, I also think his specific skill set should age really well. He's always been really good in short areas, incredible hands, like one of the best technicians on the sidelines and on the boundaries, the back of the end zone in the NFL for his whole career. The kind of guy that I think can carry high TD rates even as he starts to lose some of the explosiveness. And so, yeah, I mean, I think if he lands here, this becomes a pretty interesting passing game, actually, because between him and Burks, I think that's and Okonkwo, it's kind of a pretty good 1, 2, 3 when you have Derrick Henry as your running back. I'm going to be really interested if he lands here in what the market does, because it is a weak division. And I think it could actually have a pretty big impact on, what looks right now like some pretty low numbers in terms of what the market thinks they're going to be for like a point scoring potential or all those things. I think they would probably rise and look more clearly like the second best team in this division, and like one that's a little bit more middle of the pack just by adding a receiver, because he would, I think, really, I mean, they're thin at receiver right now. Burks has to take a step forward.
Bad. And it would too, as far as like that risk I was talking about on Tannehill, maybe you start to take some shots on Tannehill, depending on the price tag, if that happens. Because part of the reason now, we went out order a little bit, but like the pass catchers are just bad. Like, even if you like Burks and Okonkwo, that's kind of it.
Right. There might be a little more upside in Tannehill's line if he has Hopkins in addition to those two, right? I mean, he could actually throw for a decent yardage rate. I mean, with just those two, it's tough.
Or as far as Burks, if they sign D-Hop, I think the target share takes a step back, but the offense feels better. It's probably a slight net loss for Burks, but I don't think it would kill him, because as we said, like we've got so much unallocated target share for ourselves to begin with, and we kind of have Burks is fine with that. Like, he could still pretty easily be a 20% target share guy. And if he's good 20% target share guy, it might not be a huge hit type season, but I think you'd be fine with that type of talent. Obviously, you'd hope for 20% target share and a higher pass volume offense, but
agreed. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think if Hopkins doesn't come, I mean, this isn't an exciting offense, but Burks is still a year 2 receiver at his price. Because like the implication there is if Hopkins doesn't come, the real upside with Burks is that he could just completely consolidate and be like their main receiver, very much like AJ Brown did in this offense 2 or 3 years ago, right? And I'm not saying Burks is as good as AJ Brown, but that's the upside case, and you can make the bet pretty cheap. So yeah, I mean, he's a good year 2 profile. He did enough on a per route basis for me to be interested in him going into this year.
Okonkwo, we got for 75 targets. You have 69. We're slightly more bullish on him. He had some really good numbers down the stretch. I know we had a high stakes season long team where we were just like toast at tight end, and we failed to get Okonkwo early, and that was something we were talking about, and just watching his efficiency over the tail end of the season. He's going off right now as tight end 12, 129th overall. The ETR ranks are slightly a bit value on him, but I think as I approach tight end in general, like I'm not super keen to grab tight ends in this range, but when he slips past ADP, I feel fine taking him. And at that point, I think there is a little bit of upside here.
Yeah, there is. I think it's a tough bet. I'm maybe a little bit stung by the Albert O bet last year, but when you're talking about only 172 routes, really strong per route stuff, but we're extrapolating, and we're in an offense that isn't going to probably throw a ton. We both projected it to be a 55% pass rate pass rate in an offense that isn't expected to score a ton of points. So one of the big hits with tight ends can be when they just run hot on touchdowns, right? And that's probably a little tougher for Okonkwo than somebody in a better offense. I do think the price is a little bit steep, even though I like what we saw in year one. I like the player. I want to be in on a second-year player that shows, flashes in year one. Generally speaking, this is one where I haven't found myself pulling the trigger as much, which maybe seems odd relative to my Burks comments, but I guess I'm just a little bit more interested in Burks' overall profile going back to college. It's it is a tough passing game right now based on the market factors, the projected points and everything.
Yeah, I'm somewhat surprised you have him and Jelani Woods kind of so close in volume as we go over to the Colts, and we'll get to the tight ends of the Colts, but that stuck out to me. So I want to hear your thoughts on Jelani when we get to tight end. But starting with the Colts with play calling, a tough spot. We've got a big change at the quarterback position going from Matt Ryan, who is, a statue quarterback who was like at the tail end of his career, to, likely Anthony Richardson, who is the opposite, a rookie who is pretty raw and going to run a ton. And then you've also got a switching coaching staff. You got Shane Steichen coming over here. And as a result, I think we're slightly higher on the play volume, just thinking maybe he'll try and go a little bit up tempo. And when we say up tempo, I mean, we have the Colts at league average plays. You're one play below league average. So not a huge difference, but there's some uncertainty here, I guess, is what I'm getting at. But even if they run a little bit faster, are they going to be able to maintain drives? And if they run the football a lot, that's still not great for play volume, even if you're running at a higher clip. And we both have them, similar to Tennessee, at a 56.5% pass rate.
But this is notable where you guys came in above me, because I kind of felt like I was artificially bumping their play volume up when I looked into Shane Steichen's history. Initially, I had them as pretty run heavy due to a rookie mobile QB, and also had them below average pace, just sort of based on pretty substantially below average, just sort of based on the fact that Richardson's sort of seen as a little bit raw, and we have a first-time head coach, and we have all these things. But you go look at Steichen's history, last 2 years with the Eagles, they were closer to league average in 2021 in terms of play volume, but played a lot quicker last year, up tempo, no huddle rate was strong. The year prior in 2020, he was the OC with the Chargers, and he was on the Chargers staff dating back to the Phillip Rivers years. But that was Herbert's strong rookie year in 2020, and they led the NFL in plays. That was a big part of it. So his history, even with a rookie quarterback with Herbert, has, and then a young quarterback in Hurts over the last couple of years, has been a willingness to still push tempo. He's not going to baby his quarterbacks, it seems. So I got a lot more interested, and I think your play volume is very interesting. It definitely, I wasn't super into this offense. You have, mobile quarterbacks also limit the skill position volume, certainly. And so just in my head coming in, I wasn't super interested. Those play volume notes, the fact that this team could actually run at an above average tempo, potentially more plays per game than average, did get me more interested in what that could mean for the whole offense.
Yeah, and it's still hard for the offense. I think despite that, bullishness on the play calling, we're somewhat bearish on the individual fantasy pieces at cost. And it starts with Anthony Richardson, where a ton of rushing upside. We know he has that. And if Steichen's able to develop him quickly, it gets exciting. You've got a somewhat weak division. You're playing domed home games, but something we've hit on, Ben, is the quarterback position in fantasy has changed, where what was once, if you had rushing ability, you had like this high end fantasy upside. You need to do a little bit of both now, in terms of, unless you're going to have a Justin Fields-esque season last year where he just was insane rushing the football. You've got to be able to compile some passing numbers as well. As a result, we're a little bearish on Richardson. I still take him a lot on teams where I've struggled with, let's say, like correlation in my draft. Like I've just missed a correlation early, and I get in those, QB 10 plus window, and I'm like, well, I'll take Richardson because I'm kind of banking on the elite rushing season, and I don't need the correlation as much. It's sort of like a cop out for my teams where I don't get the stacks to work out correctly. But yeah, I am a little concerned stacking him with like Pittman, just in terms of, will the completion rate be what it needs to be to support kind of a volume pass catcher in an offense that's probably not going to throw a lot. And yeah, ultimately we have him QB 14. He's going off at QB 11. The quarterbacks that we have ahead of him are like Dak, Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones. But it's still like a similar tier.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to see in a projection how you could get him to a really strong projection. We just mentioned Steichen coming over from Philly. One of the things we talked about when we did the NFC East was that Jalen Hurts basically ran away with the most designed rushes for a quarterback last year. I do think you can project Richardson's designed rush rate to be particularly high. He also had a good sack rate or sack avoidance in college, which, something we talk about when we're talking about Justin Fields is the element where he takes a lot of sacks and scrambles a lot. And so a lot of dropbacks don't turn into pass attempts. Richardson is a little bit less of a concern there, helps offset, probably a high scramble rate, but you're still going to probably get a decent number of pass attempts per drop back. If his sack rate is low at the NFL level, it might rise at the NFL level, but that is one potential positive for him as well, where there's not as many sort of wasted plays there. And then I have him kind of projected for low rushing efficiency. And one of the things about him that we do talk a little bit about is he wasn't particularly he didn't have a massive rushing production season in college. His final year, I think he was just over 600 rushing yards. I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me, but I do remember looking at them while doing the projection. If you go over to PFF, so in college football stats, they count sacks as rushing numbers for quarterbacks. If you go over to PFF, you can get those pulled out. If you remove his sacks, his rushing numbers go up a little bit. But if you then remove the sacks for some of the other QBs, they go up even more, basically, because Richardson did have that low sack rate. And so it's kind of interesting to see that his rushing, both, efficiency, yards per carry, and overall yardage wasn't particularly high for a guy who we know is like basically a one-of-one quarterback athlete, just an incredible athlete. You'd like him at the college level where his athleticism should be a step better than the defense, more, a bigger step better than the defense, more so than at the NFL level. You'd like to see that manifest. It doesn't mean it can't, because he still is an incredible athlete. It doesn't mean it can't at the NFL level. It's just a little bit of a concern. But then, even as I'm kind of culling his rushing efficiency because of some of that he hasn't really displayed it on the football field yet, it's still, a 700-yard rushing season in my projections, and like there's clear upside above it. So there's just so many ways you can look at his projection and feel like he can smash, like he can break fantasy football. This is the profile we talk about that can be so valuable. And I see why people are really optimistic and taking him where they are. I also understand why, like you were saying, at ETR, you're coming in at QB 14 and he's going to QB 11. I have not taken a lot of him either. I do think he's exciting, and he is a guy I've taken a couple times, but a challenging pick because some of the passing stuff is legit concerning. His accuracy is a legit concern. There's bench risk here, and that kind of just kills that team if he does get benched. At the same time, if he plays 17 games, he's probably going to beat his cost, right? I mean, just with that rushing ability.
Yeah, so he's an interesting one for sure. Like I said, it somewhat depends on my team construction. I don't have a lot of him, but I'm probably drafting him at a higher rate than like if you were just to look at the rankings would suggest. Part of the problem with the Colts, and it extends to Jonathan Taylor, where we've got some pretty big efficiency differences here, is like their average spread is plus 2.8, which is like sixth worst in the NFL. Their average team total is 19.2, which is fifth lowest in the NFL. And I know from a DFS perspective, when we try to project yards per carry on a weekly basis, at least, like it's such a variant statistic that a lot of times one of the biggest, correlated metrics is just what the Vegas expectation is for that week. Even if you just put like a piece of paper over who the actual running back was. Now for season long, I think there's more of a range of outcome you have to consider with the talent of the player. But we had JT at only 4.3 yards per carry. I think I'm going to raise that to 4.5 where he was last year. You do mix that with having a mobile quarterback tends to increase the running back efficiency. So it's just been a tough projection for me on JT. I know ultimately I've ended up below market where I'm a little scared the offense doesn't score a lot and Richardson takes some rush attempts and JT's target share isn't great. And it's like with those three concerns, like those get me shaky at the beginning of round 2, even though the player is clearly very talented.
Definitely. I think the point you made about Richardson's mobility is a positive one. You go back and look at how good Miles Sanders has been with the Eagles, with Steichen coming over from there. I talked a little bit about the design run rate for Jalen Hurts in that offense. I do think Richardson will be used enough in those ways that, that could help, his rushing efficiency, but also should force defenses to respect his athleticism on the edge and should really open up stuff on the interior for Jonathan Taylor. My big thing with him is like 2 years ago, we thought he was so good that he was basically in contention for the 101 last year, despite the fact that we weren't really, he didn't have a huge rushing or receiving workload. I know you talked a lot about that last year, Leone, that like you look at his receiving profile and it's tough to justify taking him 101. It was sort of an overpay. But the reason people want to do that was how good he was in 2021. He has less of an efficient season. My thing is like he's still potentially in his, prime as a runner. He's not getting old or anything. If he comes back and looks like he did in 2021 as an explosive play guy, as a big, I do think there's still some real potential for him to have a monster rushing season. I'm projecting him to be pretty efficient. You mentioned those yards per carry numbers. I have him at 4.8. I'm projecting him to get more efficient than last year based on the Richardson influence. And then another side to his profile and to this whole offense. And this is a note that I didn't really come to until I did this projection, but what the pace stuff that we were talking about, I think Gardner Minshew is a really interesting player for this whole projection process, because I wasn't super interested in the Colts, but I do think Minshew would shift everything in this projection. I would have obviously a lot less quarterback rushing. I think the pace could still be up because he was with Steichen in Philly. He knows the offense presumably, and I think you would have way, way more targets than we're currently projecting. I mean, one of my notes here is that right now, as I have it with Richardson at quarterback, it's fairly easy to project this team for the fewest pass touchdowns in the league for the reasons that we were talking about. I think, you're talking about volume and efficiency. Minshew, you're going to get more volume, potentially even more efficiency. Suddenly, like a Michael Pittman could have a lot more ceiling if Minshew was a quarterback. I think Taylor's receiving would be one of the biggest beneficiaries, right? And there's some ceiling outcomes for Taylor this season where if Minshew plays a substantial number of games, even if it's just like 5 or 6, he could have some big receiving games in there. I don't know. I'm willing to make the talent bet on Taylor because I think either quarterback in there can have benefits for him. Richardson, obviously, with the rushing efficiency, as we were talking about. But it's a lot of the different sort of multiverse thinking about their offense. Taylor is a centerpiece and has to be what he was in 2021, and I think a lot of this looks better for him than it did last year with Matt Ryan at QB.
Yeah, I think I prefer Chubb and Barkley right now, or the receivers going, but it's there's two sides to that, and it's difficult. And I'm glad you brought up the Minshew stuff because I do know our projections were more bullish on all of the Colts skill players when we had it weighted a little bit more towards Minshew than we do now. So it'll be interesting to track sort of like how we're handicapping the games played as the offseason develops. There's not a lot to talk about. I think at RB2, they have rookie Evan Hall. They've got Zach Moss, Deion Jackson. I haven't sniffed any of these guys. I guess Hall will just kind of blindly taking a shot at the rookie, but just real quick, are you taking any of these guys? Okay.
I haven't. No.
Let's go to Pittman, who, like I said, earlier in the offseason, we were kind of bullish on him, have become a bit more bearish just because I think he's a tough player where you're not projecting a lot of team pass volume if you're leaning this towards Richardson playing most of the games. And you're also probably not projecting a very high completion percentage. You and I both have a 61% completion rate on Richardson, which, isn't terrible. But for a player like Pittman, this dude needs to rack up catches. His ADP has certainly dropped a lot from where it's been in the past. He's 62 overall, wide receiver 31. So there's some room where he doesn't have to be, rack up as many catches as he did last year when he was a 3rd-round pick. But I've had a really tough time taking Pittman since we sort of made the play calling adjustments to lean towards Richardson. I'd rather blindly take shots on like some of the downfield guys that come at cheap price tags. Most notably Alec Pierce and Josh Downs. They also have Ashton Doolin, and they brought over Isaiah McKenzie, who's a bit of a gadget plus player, I guess you could call, for Buffalo last year.
Yeah, I'm with you on all that. I often don't take I haven't taken a lot of Pittman. And if I take Richardson, it's usually behind ADP, and then I kind of like to stack him later with somebody has more of a vertical profile like Pierce. I think it's just easier to see the spike weeks sort of correlating with a Richardson spike week when you're talking about like, a long pass touchdown than, as you said, Pittman's particular type of ceiling, which is often like 8 catches or something. Pittman does have the ability to win downfield as well. I think he's a good player. And you mentioned, the price has fallen. And as I was saying, like if you get a lot of Minshew, I think Pittman can hit, frankly, at this price pretty solidly. But as it's currently constructed, yeah, I'm concerned in a lot of the ways that we talked about DJ Moore when we did the Bears pod.
Okay, let's go to tight end, and I sort of teased the aggressive Jelani Woods projection that you have. You got him for 66 targets. We've got 33 for Jelani Woods. I'm a little concerned. I guess like the concerns with Albert O I have like with Jelani, just that Colin Granson actually had a higher target share last year. And I'm just worried this is going to be spread out again among their 3 tight ends. You seem to have a little bit more confidence that it's going to be Jelani as the one here, which he's basically free. I've even with that thought, I've been drafting some Jelani late, especially on the Richardson teams. We were kind of hoping for like the touchdown spike season, and you just get some of those weeks. But if you think he's got a more realistic chance of emerging out of this tight end group, he goes very late right now.
Yeah, and it's funny. I haven't taken a lot of him. So it's funny. The projection implies that I'm a lot more confident in it than I actually am. I've always felt that Frank Reich had a lot to do with the ways that they use their tight ends, sort of rotated.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always thought Frank Reich played things sort of intelligently, but very relative to game script, and had different sort of packages for different scripts and different situations. Like he would play Eric Ebron more as his pass catching tight end when they were trailing in obvious passing situations. So I think sort of what I was looking at when I was doing this projection was maybe Jelani has a chance to sort of consolidate and be a more traditional number 1 tight end in the ways that Steichen has used, like, Dallas Goedert in the last couple of years. I don't think that's something that I'm putting a ton of weight on. There's not a lot, like you said, in the data. Both of them had nearly identical targets per out run last year. Woods a little bit higher ADOT, so a little bit more like if we weight the targets per out run for depth of target, a little bit more weighted volume, but similar route rates, similar target shares. Not even a lot to say that he would be ahead of Granson, let alone, obviously Mo Wiley Cox has been there for a long time. They have notable names at tight end. So wasn't really trying to make a strong Jelani Woods stance here, as much as I do think there's some potential in this passing game for one tight end to sort of consolidate in a way that hasn't existed in the past iterations of the Colts over the last few years.
Let's go over to Houston. We have them identically at 61.5 plays per game, but this is one of the bigger discrepancies we have in terms of pass rate. And at the end, we have them at 34.6 pass attempts per game. You're at 31.5. I think your number is probably better. You know, it's difficult with these rookie quarterbacks where the team's expected to be bad. So, like, the expectation based on Vegas would be like a higher pass rate, but sometimes these teams just they'll stick with a negative PROE. They'll call games very conservatively from the start. So this is a challenging one. And even just broader, I know in best ball, there's a lot of, I have a tendency to be like, oh, let me backdoor stack Bryce Young. Let me backdoor stack CJ Stroud because like I'll take advantage of the uncertainty. What if one of these guys is really good when, you know, historically, I know JJ Zacharyason's done a lot of work and, you know, the skill players around the rookie quarterbacks, like they just really don't hit that frequently. It's not generally good. So it's tough. These teams are expected to be bad. So it's like, well, what if they're good? But what are the odds that actually happening? Ultimately, we have CJ Stroud projected for a similar amount of fantasy points, 250 over the course of the season. But we're getting there in a little bit of different ways where I'm projecting more pass volume. You have him running a bit more with 64 rushes. We've got 35 rushes. So some more fantasy points coming via the ground game.
Yeah, I'm sort of just saying, look, they're going to trail. They're going to be in pass situations, and maybe he does some more late game scrambling. Mm-hmm. But I don't feel – I think the younger QBs tend to scramble a little bit more. We do see that, but I don't feel like I have a good basis on how much he's going to scramble. He was protected really well in college is another element where he maybe never had to leave the pocket, but I expect that will have to happen more in the NFL. But I'm right with you on all the play volume stuff. I mean, defensive coach as well, right? Rookie QB, not a lot of talent. Low play volume typically for that type of offense, and often, like you said, a negative PROE, even if it doesn't make sense. They're going to be a little bit more run heavy, even if they shouldn't be. And the defensive coach element is a big one. Like we say that a lot, and it's like, oh, you know, maybe not been statistically proven. I'm not sure if it is. What I would say is when you get the surprise teams, it feels so often that it's tied to a Mike McDaniel, right? It's an offensive mind taking over, and it's interesting the way that he uses that his new roster, or go back to Sean McVay when he took over for the Rams. I mean, it's these offensive guys. Nick Sirianni has done great with the Eagles. Came from an offensive background. Defensive coaches are just less likely to hit, like as you were describing, the market's down on this team. We need them to really outperform expectations. I don't think you're likely to get that dramatic outperforming of those expectations with a defensive coach. It just seems like I can't think of a lot of examples just anecdotally.
Yeah. And let's go to running back where Dameon Pierce is somewhat tough. I think in years past, this would have been a really easy pass for me. The market's gotten sharper and it like makes you have to think about these just because the price is better. The negatives for Pierce is like almost the nut scenario hit last year, and it just didn't matter because the team's not that good and they're not going to be that good again. And he's going to catch some passes, but not enough passes, right? Like he seemed like he was a really good running back rusher of the football. And, you know, he ends up at 4.3 yards per carry with 4 touchdowns in the 13 games that he plays. Of course, if he had played the full season, maybe compiles a bit more, but on a weekly basis, I don't think he had very many like high end weekly outcomes. And now you've got a new coaching staff and a player where there's not a whole ton of draft capital involved. They bring over Devin Singletary. Like I get a little squeamish. At the same time, I've had some 0 RB builds where Dameon Pierce is there at the 6-7 turn. And I'm like, give me some of that projectable volume right now at the 6-7 turn. I know Pat Corain had a really good tweet about how he's more concerned than ever in taking upside early at the running back position. And part of that is because he can now get projectable volume in like a player like Dameon Pierce, or even a little bit later in rounds 8 and 9 with somebody else. So all that to say is I'm just pretty neutral on Dameon Pierce right now.
That's kind of where I fall. And I agree with you. He was better than I expected last year. But I'm still not sure sort of how good. And I think the one sort of bull case that I would make is I do like Singletary coming over, but Singletary's never really been a particularly good receiving back. I think Pierce's receiving could potentially take a step forward. You know, like Rex Burkhead not a super important name, but did seem to steal enough of the passing work. A little bit of Daria Gumbawale last year. I did the projection here, and I was like, I mean, there's not really a receiving back on this roster. Singletary, I think, a better number 2 than Pierce had behind him last year, but it might actually allow Pierce to do a little bit more in terms of routes, and that could be slightly beneficial to his ceiling.
That's a good note. And Singletary, also kind of feel neutral. I think I'm a little bit below, we're a little bit below market on Singletary. I know I've drafted him on some teams where you get into this spot where I feel like after Singletary, you really get into dart throw territory. And I think Singletary will have a little bit of base role. And he does have some good rushing efficiency metrics, even though he's been horrible as a receiving back, where I'm okay taking him. I'm going to be like below market in terms of my exposures, but he's not like in a void for me.
No, I've taken a decent amount of Singletary, actually. I mean, pretty cheap, and seems like the pretty clear number 2. Like, they bring in this productive veteran.
I could be talked into more Singletary because I definitely get the argument for him. It's kind of just, I guess some of it circles back to the team not expecting to score. So when you, and then does it hit? But I sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I could be talked into more bullish on Singletary.
Yeah, I mean, he's cheap enough, I think but you're right. There's other concerns too, like we were just talking about with like Tajay Spears. So he's not somebody I'm all over, but he is a guy that, I'm taking a lot of running backs in those later rounds, usually building out my running back room and taking more receivers heavy in a lot of my drafts, heavy early. And so, there's definitely times when I get to spots where I'm like, okay, I feel comfortable with Singletary here, and I like his price at least.
One of the wide receivers I know the ETR ranks are most bullish on relative to ADP is Nico Collins. We've got him at 92 targets, and he kind of gets there just, even with a pretty tame projection. The upside case, we don't even have that crazy of an upside case for him, and he gets there in our projections. And you've got him even higher at 107 targets. The main competition is Robert Woods. And then you've also got John Mechie, who did not play last season and is back this season, which is great to see. A lot of uncertainty around him as a result of the missed year. And obviously it was his rookie. This will be his rookie year. So thoughts on the wide receivers for Houston?
Yeah, I mean, Collins had a good year last year. He elevated to a 22.4 targets per route run at a higher ADOT than his rookie year. His yards per route run went from 1.24 up to 1.68. Not like amazing, but definitely took a step forward. He's got the type of body that you would expect him to be more of a red zone presence than he's been so far in his career. I think he's had really low touchdown rate so far. I think, what does he have? 1 touchdown as a rookie and 2 last year. 3 TDs so far on 126 career targets. Like, that's not going to likely, I mean, it is a bad offense, but that's like still due for regression in the touchdown scoring department, especially for a 6'4", 215-pound, big bodied wide receiver. The fact that he drew the volume last year with Brandon Cooks there, I think was pretty darn notable. Cooks kind of given up on the team a little bit at times last year. At least that was sort of the reporting. But Collins stepped into that sort of number 1 role. I think he's interesting for sure. Robert Woods is someone who we saw sort of the age cliff last year. His yards per out run fell to 1.14, way below even. He had been dropping off a little bit the last couple of years, but way below even his previous sort of drop-offs. Targets per out run fell all the way to 17.7%. Looked like he just didn't have much left in the tank when you look at his numbers. And so there's not a lot of competition here unless Mechie is really good. And he's an interesting name as well. We'll see, obviously just great to see him back playing football, but we'll see how he is able to assimilate. But Collins does look really interesting.
Yeah, so we're both bullish on Collins. Referenced Pat Crane a bunch, winner of Best Ball Mania 3. He's got his new site, Legendary Upside. We'll reference him again because he tweeted on Robert Woods. I'm glad he tweeted so I didn't have to, because I still got tagged in the Robert Woods tweet. But again, we hit on this with with Zay Jones, but like material difference between playing best ball and managed leagues, where like managed leagues, Robert Woods is basically undraftable to me, but best ball 18th round, and the dude's probably, their starting wide receiver got $10 million guaranteed. He's 31. So as Crane pointed out in his tweet, he's old, but he's not ancient. And yeah, if you just need some wide receiver volume late, if it's a shaky team, I definitely get taking Robert Woods super late. You're not going to hit a home run with that pick, but sometimes a home run in round 18 is just getting like 4 or 5 weeks that you can use out of that player, even if it's not, league winning type stuff.
Fair enough.
Anything on Dell?
No, I'm not like super in on him. My biggest thing is my projection's not showing up on our sheet because I called him Tank Dell. You called him
Tank Dell, yeah.
We got to figure out his name. But yeah, I have him for like 35 targets. There was a lot of hype in the rookie OTAs and stuff that
Stroud, the Stroud narrative type stuff.
Stroud was liking him. I think it's a little bit deeper here than it feels. Like I think that was easy to pick up on and be like, oh, Houston needs somebody. But when you start remembering Mechie's there, you mentioned the Wood stuff.
Fair.
They also brought in Noah Brown from the Cowboys, who ran a lot of routes for the Cowboys last year, has that sort of veteran. I mean, I don't think he's going to be like great, but I think a lot of scenarios where he's running routes ahead of Dell, frankly. And then Nico at the top, plus Dalton Schultz is now a legit tight end. Like it's not as barren as it feels, even though there's not a lot of it's like these guys aren't stars, but there's not like available routes necessarily. Super easy available routes.
Yeah, let's go over to Schultz, who had a couple really strong years for the Cowboys, then makes his money in free agency, comes over to the Texans, and talk about a problem like trying to figure out like not just dumping volume on a guy. They are a little bit deep at wide receiver. They're not really deep at tight end though, and we've each got Schultz with around 88 to 89 targets. He's someone that like just on the math, it's tough for us to not be ahead of market structurally. I have a tough time drafting Schultz. I feel better about him on like FFPC or DraftKings, where the empty sort of volume can go a longer way at tight end. Like if he just racks up more catches than other tight ends and isn't necessarily super efficient, but on underdog, it hurts me a little bit to click Schultz because I'm not sure what the upside case is, but some of the value and projections is being somewhat anchored to them, even if, and then make some adjustments. And we're trying to be conservative on them, but still spits out at least positionally above ADP for us.
I mean, his ADP fell a ton year over year. And he had a career high last year in targets per route run, some of his numbers, but that wasn't great. It was 20.6%. He's been in Dallas basically a huge routes player, not like a huge target earner. I know early in the offseason when I was writing that targets per route run piece that I referenced a bit ago, I was going to be concerned about him changing teams to Houston because it felt like he just sort of, gained the trust of Dak Prescott, got the sort of quarterback tight end connection, not really a huge target earner, but running a ton of routes and fitting into an offense and in a more efficient passing game. But like at a certain point at his price, he's fallen enough where you're like, well, yeah, we were just talking through, there's not a lot of target dominant players in this passing.
Yeah, he's going around Okonkwo where, we hit on like some of the risks with extrapolating his volume.
Right. Exactly. There's other concerns for the players going around him. That's the best way to put it. And so I'm willing to take the swing a little bit because of that.
Cool. All right. That's going to do it for us with the 5th installment of the offseason's projection special. That's it for the AFC South. As always, follow Ben's work on Twitter at @yardspergretch and his Stealing Signals newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. You can find all my stuff in the Established Run Underdog rankings over at establishedrun.com. If you're listening to this on iTunes, please rate and review us. Watching on the Established Run YouTube channel, give us a thumbs up, subscribe. Helps us to continue doing content like this for free. Appreciate everybody tuning in.